Now listen, like treatment-wise, I'm much more of a utilitarian, and I think that before even approaching the question of self-love, it's worth checking out a person's environment first. Because, and this kind of gets into your question of, well, healing and what is healing. I think that the vast majority of problems people are walking in with, um, it might not be the stated problem that they have, but I think most of them are really rooted in their environment. People come in, the first questions I'm asking is, okay, well, how's work going? You're bringing in the money. Are you able to tackle your bills? Is that sorted out? How's sleep going? Does your wife have the washing machine? How are you going to be able to get that? Is that doable? Um, you know, how are your kids doing? Are they getting the tutoring that they need? Trying to deal with the problems they're having in school. I mean, these are normal life problems. These aren't necessarily what we would call, mental illnesses. But, if you have a mental illness, I mean, these are just going to hike those up like you wouldn't believe. And 9 times out of 10, it's just being able to figure out these more environmental issues that really is the fundamental problem that people are having in life. I mean, here, put it this way. You kind of getting back to the neuroscientists. I mean, like, look at the nervous system. I mean, that sucker basically is mapping onto the environment with an unbelievable amount of accuracy. I mean, before we're able to actually observe the world that we're filtering, our nervous system is already at play analyzing, assessing the world we live in. In many ways we're outsourcing psychologically our psyche into the world around us. So I mean, it stands to reason. Well, if that's the case, you might as well try and address those first, and they're a lot easier to address. I mean, take people say with personality disorders, I challenge you. You ask every single one, how's your sleep? They're getting 2-3 hours of sleep at best. And if you're able to see improvement on that, I mean, if you get somebody who's coming in with an SCL 90, they're scoring clinical levels and everything. Take 10 weeks to focus on developing a healthy, consistent sleep habit. Those scores are halved. So, before maybe even talking about, self-love as a core element of healing, I think addressing practical living might be easy. I don't know if it's more important in the sense of like a meaning sense of the word, but I think from a practical sense, they're more important and they're easier to sort out. And in line with this way of thinking about healing as kind of like domains of healing, like a hierarchy of healing, that being the first place to focus. Well, then next up is going to be, focusing on relationships and then focusing on the individual last, vis-a-vis himself. And kind of getting back to the question of morality that I mentioned earlier, when you have like a dominance treatment designed this way of, how's the environment, how's your relationship, how is yourself, what you're really asking is, how ought I respond to my environment? How ought I respond to others? How ought I respond to myself? Well, that's moral questions. Carl Jung said that, that moral development is a substitute for psychology. I think that's 100% true. Because when people are coming in, they're asking, how do I solve my problems? Great, how do you solve your problems? Okay, we have to organize that. You have to make moral decisions on what is a problem and what would be the right way of solving that problem. I mean, that is the heart of moral questioning, moral living. And taking that one drop farther, as a therapist, if what you're really doing is trying to guide a client to better moral living, well, what are you doing? What's your role as a therapist? And I think there again, Jung hit it on the head, is that the therapeutic act is an act of love. It's based on love. And that for yourself as a therapist, well, then it becomes for yourself a moral question, is how ought I respond to this person who I love? Who I'm trying to, again, like love as a moral responsibility. That's a fair question to tackle. I wonder how, I don't know, I'm curious, how many therapists would really buy into that way of thinking. about the work that they do as being demonstrating love in a moral way, pushing people's lives forward through that mechanism. I'm curious, So kind of tying all these different ideas I'm shooting out to maybe make more sense of it here, cutting through the jungle. Yes, there needs to be self-love. That definitely has to be a focus in treatment. Because it's a relationship with yourself. Fundamentally, you have to be able to relate to yourself just like you're relating to the environment and just like you're relating to other people. But I think you can't lose sight of that dark side. That has to be contended with. Using more IFS language, that's kind of more the idea of unblending the protectors, bringing them out, inviting them to express themselves as well. And also you say, the Jungian analysts and the existentialists also, I think, took that idea farther in the sense of making a push. We can't avoid, we can't ignore our dark side. They are really there. They are beings that are, whether we like it or not. And that a part of self-love is maybe it's more developing a deep respect for the parts of ourselves that we don't, or the parts of ourselves that we're afraid of. And here also I think is in the spirit of ACT, in the sense of not holding on to any type of identity too rigidly. If I have to be a self-lover, that also can be limiting and deny a person a certain amount of flexibility they need to, again, using ACT terminology, lacking the flexibility here to be effective in one's environment. So kind of riffing off that idea of developing respect, self-respect, I wonder, also this idea of, Jung as Jung's idea of therapy being a love process, a moral love process. I wonder if love itself, the love that a person can feel for oneself, is that an outcome of real honesty? Maybe that's the power of honesty that speech produces, of, again, trying to, bringing in this idea of trying to articulate truth. Well, maybe honesty does exactly that, in the sense of the more that we are engaging ourselves, the more we are engaging the world, the more we're trying to crystallize and articulate our thoughts, if that's what ultimately does produce love in any context for ourselves and other people and the world around us. So I think summing up this long-winded response here, I guess I am pushing back on the idea that self-love is a core of healing, and I don't think it is. I don't think it's the core at all. I think it's a part of it, but it might be more useful, say, to, if you look at all the different therapeutic traditions, and ask, well, what's the common denominator of treatment for each one? I think it's courage. I think it's developing courage to face the things that we don't want to face. Whether with the psychodynamic folks, it's facing and integrating your shadow, or trying to be more aware of transferences, or, from a behavioral standpoint, exposure therapy itself, of physically going to things that cause you fear. Or from a CBT tradition, schema challenging experiments. Or third wave, ACT and DBT. I mean, those are emotion exposure therapies fundamentally at the end of the day. But all those different traditions, they're really shooting for the same thing, that the core of healing is developing oneself courageously, acting courageously, learning how to do that. And then sometimes that does mean developing self-love. But I think it also means developing a healthy awareness and, again, a self-respect for every part of our being, no matter how much we wish it wasn't there. I hope that was helpful, useful in the work that you're doing.